They were the women who shaped Hollywood. With faces that lit up the silver screen and voices that commanded studios, they were adored by millions. Their beauty defined generations. Their names were legend. But behind the flawless makeup and studio-manufactured smiles, some of them hid something far darker. Resentment, jealousy, ruthlessness. In an industry ruled by power and image, cruelty often wore the mask of charm. Some manipulated, some destroyed careers, and others destroyed lives. Today, we open the gilded doors to a darker corner of the golden age. These are not just the stars, they are the 20 most cruel actresses of classic Hollywood. And as you'll see, their real stories are far more chilling than any role they ever played. Joan Crawford, the perfect mother. Until the doors closed. Joan Crawford was the American dream personified. From a laundress's daughter to the Oscar-winning star of Mildred Pierce, she rose through MGM's ranks with raw ambition and unmatched screen presence. Her image was carefully curated, sophisticated, strong, maternal, Hollywood's queen of reinvention. But her children knew a different Joan. Her adopted daughter, Christina, exposed decades of mental and physical abuse in the memoir Mommy Dearest, later adapted into a disturbing film. The wire hanger scene wasn't exaggeration, it was testimony. Joan demanded perfection and punished imperfection with fury. Screaming matches in the middle of the night, beatings for imagined slights, emotional manipulation that left lasting trauma. Even outside the home, Joan was known for her cold ambition. She sabotaged roles, spread rumors about co-stars, and clashed violently with Bette Davis. Once, after a film set confrontation, a crew member remarked, "If Joan were a man, she'd have been court-martialed for how she commanded fear." When she died in 1977, Joan left nothing to Christina and her brother. Her will said bluntly, "It is my intention to make no provision for reasons which are well known to them." In public, she was a star. In private, she was a storm no child could survive. Sharp tongue, sharper knives. Bette Davis didn't just act, she devoured the screen. With 2 Oscars and unforgettable performances in All About Eve and now Voyager, she built a career playing women who were fierce, intelligent, and unapologetically powerful. Off-screen, she was just as formidable and just as feared. Bette's cruelty was rarely physical. It was psychological warfare. She humiliated co-stars, belittled younger actresses, and held grudges with iron resolve. Her rivalry with Joan Crawford became legendary, but few knew that she also destroyed multiple rising stars behind the scenes, simply for threatening her dominance. During Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, she had Coca-Cola banned from set to taunt Crawford's Pepsi allegiance. And that was only the beginning. Colleagues described her as cutting, vindictive, and brilliant. She once said, "I don't take the trouble to be charming." And she never did. Even in her autobiography, Davis showed little remorse for the people she left wounded in her path. She called it survival. When she passed away in 1989, Hollywood mourned a titan, but those who truly knew her, they remembered a woman who could make or break you with a glance, and preferred breaking. Zsa Zsa Gabor, glamour with a slap. Zsa Zsa Gabor wasn't just famous, she was infamous. With her Hungarian accent, dazzling gowns, and unapologetic persona, she ruled the tabloids long before social media existed. Known for quips like, "I am a marvelous housekeeper. Every time I leave a man, I keep his house," she embodied a brand of luxury, wit, and scandal that captivated mid-century America. But beneath the diamonds and perfume, Zsa harbored a violent temper and a vindictive spirit. She was married 9 times, and not all those endings were amicable. She once slapped a Beverly Hills police officer across the face during a traffic stop and was charged with battery. It wasn't an isolated moment of rage. Former staff claimed she regularly lashed out, verbally berated employees, and treated people she considered beneath her with icy contempt. One ex-maid described her as a queen with a guillotine smile. Her cruelty extended to her own family. She was estranged from her daughter, Francesca Hilton, for years. When Francesca died penniless in 2015, Ziza's husband refused to pay for the funeral. Ziza, by then incapacitated, had long disinherited her. She passed away in 2016 at the age of 99. Her funeral was a strange echo of her life, lavish in appearance but emotionally hollow. Few from her early days showed up. Few wanted to. To the world, she was fabulous. But for those too close, she was fire in a silk glove. Tallulah Bankhead, chouse in a cocktail dress. Tallulah Bankhead was electric. With her husky voice, quick wit, and scandalous flair, she stormed both stage and screen. Known for performances in Lifeboat and Broadway's The Little Foxes, she drew audiences in with magnetic intensity. Offstage, she was a social hurricane. Parties, lovers, and outbursts trailed behind her like cigarette smoke. But the chaos wasn't charming to everyone. Tallulah was a whirlwind of emotional abuse, manipulation, and unchecked cruelty. She mocked co-stars to their faces, reduced assistants to tears, and was known for seducing lovers, men and women, only to discard them with venomous glee. A director once said, "She didn't burn bridges, she blew them up while laughing." Her addictions only sharpened the edges. Fueled by alcohol, pills, and cocaine, her mood swings became legendary. She once fired an understudy on opening night out of sheer spite, then forgot by morning. Even those who adored her couldn't keep up. One longtime friend confessed, loving Tallulah was like hugging a thunderstorm. Her career fizzled as fast as it blazed. She died in 1968, ravaged by emphysema and pneumonia, nearly penniless, her once grand lifestyle reduced to borrowed rooms and whispered regrets. The funeral was sparsely attended. More people remembered her scandals than her work. She lived like a firework, brilliant, wild, and dangerous. And when she exploded, no one was safe. Gloria Swanson, the diva who devoured her kingdom. Gloria Swanson wasn't just a star of silent films. She was the star. Her lavish costumes, imperious poise, and searing gaze made her an icon long before talkies arrived. Films like Sadie Thompson and Sunset Boulevard cemented her as one of Hollywood's most powerful and unforgettable presences. But what the camera captured was only half the story. Off camera, Gloria was a master manipulator. She demanded absolute control over her productions, once forcing a director to reshoot an entire reel because her eyelashes didn't look divine enough. She crushed the careers of actresses who tried to copy her look and personally blacklisted screenwriters who dared write roles that made her appear weak or aging. One young assistant director reportedly left the business entirely after she publicly humiliated him daily for breathing wrong. In love, she was equally ruthless. She had affairs with married men, including Joseph P. Kennedy, the father of JFK, whom she allegedly used to bankroll her own failed film ventures, then discarded. Friends noted that her romantic entanglements were less about passion and more about power plays. She once said, "I never loved a man I couldn't rule." Gloria died in 1983, still bathed in velvet and perfume, clinging to the myth of her own perfection. At her funeral, admirers remembered the star, but many who knew her simply stayed silent. She lived like a queen, but ruled like a tyrant. Marlene Dietrich, Ice in Silk. Marlene Dietrich arrived in Hollywood like a storm wrapped in satin. With her androgynous allure, hushed voice, and magnetic screen presence in films like The Blue Angel and Morocco, she captivated the world. Her image, tailored suits, arched brows, cool detachment, was carefully constructed and ruthlessly defended. Dietrich didn't tolerate defiance. On set, she controlled lighting, wardrobe, and even the framing of scenes. If a cameraman didn't capture her correct angle, she'd shut down production. She berated directors in front of entire crews. She once had a female co-star fired mid-production, allegedly because the woman's cheekbones were too prominent. Her emotional coldness extended beyond the set. She famously disowned her daughter for publishing a tell-all memoir. Friends were kept at arm's length. Lovers, of which there were many, were disposable. One ex said, "You could kiss Marlene, but never touch her heart." Even in wartime, when she performed for Allied troops, her cruelty lingered. She demanded exacting conditions. No dirty dressing rooms, no small stages, no ugly uniforms in her audience. A U.S. Army officer called her a patriot with a diva clause. Marlene died in 1992, alone in her Paris apartment, her final years spent in total seclusion. She wouldn't allow anyone to see her aging face, not even her closest friends. Her funeral was closed casket, just the way she wanted it. Mysterious, impenetrable, and cold. She was elegance incarnate, and as merciless as a blade. Jean Tierney, beauty that burned. Jean Tierney possessed a kind of beauty that silenced rooms. Her haunting performance in Laura and the tragic elegance in Leave Her to Heaven made her a goddess of the Minchin Vornis. Studio executives described her as too perfect for real life. But beneath that perfection lay an edge so sharp it could cut anyone who got too close. Tierney was fiercely private and fiercely proud. She despised weakness in others and even more in herself. On film sets, she was icy and indifferent, often ignoring castmates entirely. Her refusal to engage in pleasantries earned her the nickname the Ice Empress among crew members. She once refused to reshoot a scene with a younger actress, claiming the girl's breath stank of ambition. But her cruelty turned inward as well. After contracting rubella during pregnancy from a fan who broke quarantine, her daughter was born severely disabled. Jean blamed herself and the world. She spiraled into depression but refused to accept help. When her husband tried to intervene, she cut him off emotionally and financially. She told a friend, "Love doesn't fix broken things. It only teaches you how to ignore the cracks." Later in life, she endured electroshock therapy and hospitalizations. She emerged changed, quieter, subdued, but no less sharp. She died in 1991 in Texas, far from the glamour she once commanded. Few from her Hollywood circle attended her funeral. She was a portrait of beauty, but her legacy is edged in pain. Mary Pickford, America's sweetheart with a steel fist? Mary Pickford wasn't just a movie star. She was Hollywood's first true mogul. Nicknamed America's sweetheart, her curls, dimples, and innocent roles made her a symbol of purity. But off-screen, she was a powerhouse who co-founded United Artists, helped build the Academy, and knew how to keep her crown gleaming, even if it meant stepping over anyone in her way. Her ambition was relentless. She negotiated her own million-dollar contracts at a time when actresses barely had speaking roles. But with power came control. Mary was known for micromanaging directors, rewriting scripts mid-shoot, and demanding reshoots if her hair didn't fall just right. She once forced an editor to work 72 hours straight, then fired him for lack of spirit. She wasn't any softer in her personal life. Her marriage to Douglas Fairbanks was a fairy tale on paper, but behind the gates of Pickfair, their estate, she imposed strict rules. Friends described dinners as performances, where any sign of dissent or unflattering opinion could result in exile. When Fairbanks' career declined, Mary reportedly mocked him, telling a friend, "He was the king, until I changed the kingdom." In her later years, she withdrew into seclusion, refusing visitors and rarely speaking to family. She died in 1979, alone in her Beverly Hills mansion. At her funeral, only a small group of Hollywood historians attended. She built an empire with charm and ruled it with an iron hand wrapped in lace. Lucille Ball, the smile that silenced you. Lucille Ball is remembered as the queen of comedy. With her timeless role in I Love Lucy, she became a household name, breaking barriers for women in television and redefining what it meant to be funny and powerful. But behind the laughter was a woman who ruled her empire with ruthless precision. Lucille co-founded Desilu Productions and quickly became one of the most powerful women in Hollywood. But her standards were brutal. She screamed at writers who didn't understand Lucy, blacklisted actors she disliked, and was notorious for demanding absolute obedience from her staff. One producer called her a velvet trap, soft when you enter, but impossible to escape. Her relationship with Desi Arnaz was explosive. While publicly the couple played loving soulmates, insiders described constant screaming matches and mutual psychological warfare. Lucille once banned Desi from the editing room entirely, telling producers, "He's not the brains here, I am." She expected perfection from everyone, but offered little warmth in return. Co-stars recalled that she would rehearse lines until dawn, then lash out at anyone who stumbled. She didn't suffer fools, one writer recalled. But to Lucy, everyone was a fool but Lucy. Lucille died in 1989. Her legacy remains monumental, but some who worked with her quietly remember something else. A brilliant mind, yes, but also a woman who used cruelty as creative fuel. She made America laugh, but many cried behind the curtain. Olivia de Havilland, the silent assassin. To millions, Olivia de Havilland was Melanie from Gone with the Wind. Gentle, gracious, the moral compass of a turbulent story. But off-screen, she was the complete opposite. Calculated, combative, and colder than steel. Unlike her character, Olivia played the long game in real life. She was one of the first actresses to challenge the studio system and win, but not before burning bridges and allies. In a landmark lawsuit against Warner Bros., she dismantled the studio's slavery system, but privately, her own co-stars accused her of arrogance and betrayal. One actress recalled she smiled as she shoved the knife in. The most notorious story? Her feud with sister Joan Fontaine. The two were rivals from childhood, but Olivia's cruelty was legendary. She refused to speak to Joan for decades, even snubbed her at award ceremonies. When Joan died in 2013, Olivia's response was chilling. She offered no public tribute, no emotion, just silence. She kept a pristine public image, but in reality, she was feared. Directors treaded lightly around her. Younger actresses avoided eye contact. She controlled her image with military discipline, never letting vulnerability slip through. Olivia died in 2020 at the age of 104, still revered by the industry, but still resented by many who knew her. Her final years were spent in Paris, behind closed doors, granting few interviews and even fewer apologies. She played kindness on screen. Off screen, she was pure precision. The face that launched 1,000 wounds. Rita Hayworth was the fantasy of an entire generation. With her iconic role in Gilda, her cascading red hair, and her effortless sensuality, she became the very definition of Hollywood allure. But behind that sultry smile was a woman hardened by betrayal and capable of inflicting just as much as she had received. Rita was molded by men, starting with her own father, who forced her into dancing at an early age and allegedly abused her. By the time she reached stardom, she had learned how to survive by controlling, manipulating, and discarding. She married 5 times, each ending more bitter than the last. Orson Welles, one of her husbands, described her as a mirage, beautiful until you tried to touch her. On set, Rita could turn cruel with alarming ease. She often isolated co-star stars, demanded that wardrobe be tailored to outshine others, and once refused to speak a single word to a new actress because she smiled too much. Her insecurity bred a quiet malice, one that surfaced in whispers, backhanded compliments, and sudden exiles. Her emotional volatility worsened with time. By the 1960s, she was battling alcoholism and early-onset Alzheimer's, though many in the industry simply called her difficult or unstable. Few reached out. Fewer stayed. She died in 1987, cared for by a daughter who had once been estranged. Her face remains immortalized in posters, but the people she left behind remember something else. Cold eyes behind the camera, and a heart too damaged to hold love. She made the world fall in love. But no one could stay close for long. Greta Garbo, the goddess who refused to feel. Greta Garbo was more than a movie star. She was a myth. Her haunting eyes, enigmatic performances in films like Camille and Queen Christina, and her haunting tagline, "I want to be alone," cemented her as the most mysterious woman in Hollywood. She didn't just play aloof women, she was one. But Garbo's mystique was not poetic, it was weaponized. She used silence like a sword. Directors were terrified to give her direction, afraid of her famous glare and whispered condemnations. She often refused rehearsals, demanded entire sets be cleared, and could derail an entire production with a single word, no. She had few friends and fewer loyalties. Garbo would vanish from social circles without warning, abandoning friendships with no explanation. One producer who tried to cast her after her retirement received a letter with a single sentence, "How dare you?" She didn't just walk away from Hollywood, she erased it. Those who got close were treated with emotional frigidity. Her rumored lovers, both men and women, described her as emotionally vacant, obsessed with control, and allergic to intimacy. "You didn't love Garbo," one ex said. "You orbit her until she decides to cast you off." She spent her final decades in a New York apartment, refusing visitors, turning down interviews, and hiding from mirrors. She died in 1990 without fanfare or farewell. Her funeral was private, almost secretive, just as she would have wanted. She didn't burn bridges. She never let anyone cross them in the first place. Lana Turner, the bombshell who lit fires everywhere. Lana Turner was discovered at a soda fountain and turned into a Hollywood legend almost overnight. With her stunning looks and dramatic flair, she became the quintessential blonde bombshell of the 1940s and 50s, with unforgettable performances in The Postman Always Rings Twice and Peyton Place. But Lana wasn't just magnetic. She was combustible. Behind her carefully crafted image was a woman who courted chaos. Lana cycled through 8 marriages and countless affairs, often with violent or controlling men, but her own behavior was no less destructive. She was known for manipulating directors, turning co-stars against one another, and walking off set if she felt upstaged. One costume designer quit mid-film after Turner rejected over 40 wardrobe options in a single day, publicly berating him in front of the crew. The darkest chapter came in 1958 when her teenage daughter, Cheryl Crane, fatally stabbed Lana's abusive gangster boyfriend, Johnny Stompanato. Though ruled justifiable homicide, many believed Lana orchestrated events behind the scenes to protect her image. The scandal rocked Hollywood, and whispers about Lana's role never quite died. Despite it all, she maintained her fame by tightening her grip. She demanded lighting crews spend hours softening her features. She refused to work with actresses younger than 30. And she once forced a scene partner to reshoot a crying scene over 20 times because his tears weren't tragic enough. Lana died in 1995. Her legacy split between admiration and suspicion. Fans remember the glamour, but insiders, they remember the heat and the wreckage. She didn't just play femme fatales, she lived like one. Hedy Lamarr, beauty, brains, and brutality. Hedy Lamarr is often remembered as one of the most beautiful women to ever grace the screen. With her hypnotic presence in films like Algiers and Samson and Delilah, she became an icon of allure. But Lamarr wasn't just a pretty face. She was also an inventor, co-creator of frequency-hopping technology used in modern Wi-Fi. Her mind was brilliant. Her temperament, however, was unforgiving. Lamarr suffered no fools. She ridiculed directors she deemed less intelligent, refused to memorize scripts written by writers she didn't respect, and threatened to walk off sets unless the dialogue was rewritten to match her intellect. One producer recalled, "Working with Hedy was like fencing with a scalpel, graceful, but you always ended up bleeding." Her personal relationships were equally transactional. She married 6 times, and with each divorce, her demands became more extreme. One ex-husband accused her of psychological abuse, claiming she calculated cruelty as if it were math. She also developed a reputation for sabotaging rising starlets. In one infamous case, she demanded that an aspiring actress be fired from a supporting role simply for wearing lipstick too red. "There is only room for one centerpiece," Hedy reportedly said. By the 1960s, her star had faded, but her pride remained intact. She refused to take aging roles or cameos, declaring that she would never play second to a lesser mind. She died alone in 2000, estranged from most of Hollywood and from her own children. She gave the world glamour and genius, but made sure no one ever outshone her. Barbara Stanwyck, the Iron Lady in Heels. Barbara Stanwyck was a powerhouse. With piercing eyes and razor-sharp delivery, she captivated audiences in classics like Double Indemnity, Stella Dulles, and Sorry, Wrong Number. Critics praised her emotional depth and work ethic. But behind that disciplined facade was a woman whose strength often crossed the line into icy cruelty. Stanwyck rose from poverty and fought her way into stardom. That fight never stopped. She treated weakness with disdain, especially in other women. Younger actresses described her as merciless, recounting how she would mock mistakes, undermine confidence, and dominate rehearsals with a near-military style. One co-star said, "She didn't just want to be the lead, she wanted everyone else to disappear." She had a zero-tolerance policy for what she called soft actors. She once demanded a scene partner be fired mid-shoot, claiming he looked like he apologized when he blinked. Her relationships were often no softer. Her marriage to Robert Taylor ended coldly. Insiders said she treated him less like a husband and more like an accessory. Barbara controlled every element of her public image, her voice, her stride, her angles. But in doing so, she sacrificed intimacy. Friends described her as a fortress with no gates. Despite her decades of success, she died in 1990 without close family, with only a handful at her bedside. She was unbreakable, unflinching, unforgettable. But behind every triumph was someone she had to trample. The angel who cut deep. Gene Simmons appeared like an angel on screen, wide-eyed, soft-spoken, impossibly elegant. From Hamlet to Guys and Dolls, she charmed audiences with an air of innocence and vulnerability. But the real John was far more complex and far more dangerous than the ingenues she portrayed. Raised in Britain and imported to Hollywood by producer Howard Hughes, Simmons quickly learned that softness was currency, and she would spend it strategically. She developed a reputation for punishing silence. If a co-star displeased her, she would freeze them out completely, often going entire productions without speaking a single word off camera. One actor described working with her as being haunted by a ghost who hated you. Her marriage to actor Stuart Granger was a public fairy tale, but a private Cold War. Granger accused her of emotional manipulation, saying she was never angry, just calmly cruel. Simmons allegedly withheld affection, praise, even eye contact as forms of control. Jean never raised her voice, a producer once said. She didn't need to. Her silence said, "I own this room." Though her career faded gracefully, her personal relationships did not. She severed ties with longtime friends over minor slights and kept her own daughters at a distance. Even in later interviews, she rarely expressed regret, only measured disappointment. Jean died in 2010, her legacy as a screen beauty intact. But those who worked closest to her remember not the warmth of her performances, but the chill that came after cut. She wore grace like armor and wielded silence like a blade. The beauty that broke everything. Ava Gardner wasn't just beautiful, she was dangerous. Her smoldering looks, husky voice, and untamed energy made her an icon in films like The Killers, Showboat, and Mogambo. Frank Sinatra once called her the most exciting woman in the world. But Ava didn't just break hearts, she broke careers, marriages, and spirits. She lived fast and fought harder. Gardner had a reputation for being volatile on set, slapping directors, refusing retakes, and storming off mid-shoot. She drank heavily, cursed freely, and made no apologies. One cinematographer said, "You didn't direct Ava, you tried to survive her." Her relationships were emotional minefields. Her marriage to Frank Sinatra was a storm of jealousy, betrayal, and mind games. She seduced married men, discarded lovers like cigarette ash, and once reportedly told a rival actress, "He'll leave you too, just like all the others." She kept friends close only when they were useful, and destroyed them the moment they crossed her. Even in the studio system, Ava was feared. She manipulated press coverage, demanded final say on promotional materials, and once threatened to expose a producer's affair unless he recut her close-ups. Few stood up to her twice. She spent her later years in Spain, alone, drinking, and fiercely guarding her legacy. When asked in an interview if she had regrets, she answered, "Honey, I'd do it all again, just meaner." Ava Gardner died in 1990. Hollywood mourned a goddess. But those who'd met her knew, goddesses don't always have mercy. The violet-eyed hurricane. Elizabeth Taylor was more than a star, she was a force. With her mesmerizing violet eyes, lavish jewels, and iconic roles in Cleopatra, Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, and Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, she redefined Hollywood glamour. But beneath the diamonds and marriages, 8 in total, was a woman who ruled her world with obsession, jealousy, and iron will. Taylor demanded loyalty, and when she didn't receive it, she destroyed. She seduced co-stars away from wives, famously stealing Eddie Fisher from Debbie Reynolds, America's sweetheart at the time, then discarding him for Richard Burton. She once boasted, "I don't chase men, they come to me, and if they don't, I take them anyway." On set, she could be impossible. Directors catered to her moods like servants to a queen. She demanded private dressing tents, rewrites on dialogue, and even lighting changes mid-scene. One cinematographer confessed she didn't want to be seen, she wanted to be worshipped. Her relationship with Richard Burton was legendary for its passion and its toxicity. They screamed, drank, fought, and reconciled with operatic drama. But friends noted Elizabeth always had the final word, and it was usually the sharpest. She was generous to those she loved and merciless to those she didn't. Assistants were fired for trivial offenses. Actresses who approached her spotlight were often met with icy smiles and swift blacklisting. When she died in 2011, Elizabeth left behind a dazzling legacy. But for many in her shadow, the storm she carried never passed. She was breathtaking, and if you crossed her, she'd make sure you never breathed easy again. Lauren, the femme fatale, who meant every word. Lauren Bacall made her entrance into Hollywood with a voice like smoke and a stare that could paralyze. At Just Me Teen, she starred opposite Humphrey Bogart in To Have and Have Not and instantly became an icon of seductive power. But Bacall didn't just play femme fatales, she embodied their cold control in real life. Known for her sharp tongue and sharper judgments, Bacall maintained total control over her image and her surroundings. She once told a director, "You get one take. If you can't use it, that's your fault." She viewed sentiment as weakness and was known to ridicule actors who got too emotional during scenes. Her motto? Feelings are for amateurs. Even in her marriage to Bogart, which was romanticized for decades, Bacall held the upper hand. Insiders recalled that while she loved him, she dominated him, monitoring his calls, managing his career, and freezing him out for days during arguments. After his death, she rarely spoke of him with affection. Instead, she spoke of legacy. She was notorious for belittling younger actresses. On one film, she refused to be photographed next to a blonde co-star, declaring, "I don't stand next to decoration." She was deeply suspicious of anyone with ambition and once blackballed a promising actress simply because she smiled too much. Bacall died in 2014, celebrated as a legend. But many remembered her not just for her elegance, but for the chill that lingered long after she left a room. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The innocent who played everyone. Marilyn Monroe was the fantasy, the ultimate blonde, the fragile goddess whose breathy voice and playful innocence in Some Like It Hot, Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, and The 7-Year Itch made her the most desired woman of the 20th century. But behind the flirtatious giggles and helpless pout was someone far more cunning and far more devastating. Marilyn weaponized her vulnerability. She used fragility as leverage, creating chaos that forced others to pick up the pieces. She was notoriously late to shoots, sometimes by hours, knowing full well that producers, actors, and directors would bend rather than break her illusion. Her unpredictability made her impossible to manage. But that was the point. She seduced power not just romantically, but psychologically. From JFK to Arthur Miller, men fell into her orbit only to be emotionally consumed. She had a talent for turning admiration into dependence, and dependence into destruction. One studio executive said, "She didn't mean to ruin people, but she did it with terrifying grace." Co-stars suffered too. Jane Russell called working with Marilyn a waiting game between tantrums. Crew members feared upsetting her, lest she collapse into sobs and shut down production for the day. Monroe died in 1962 at just 36. Officially suicide, unofficially. Still debated. The world mourned a tragic star. But behind the tragedy were hundreds who bore witness to her quiet cruelty, crafted not with malice, but with a need so deep it swallowed everything around her. She was the most desired woman in the world, and the most dangerous to love.